Kazushi Sakuraba was once called the Gracie Killer, a national hero, and a legend in Japanese MMA. But behind the pride, glory, and roaring arenas, something darker was happening. Sakuraba wasn't just fighting opponents, he was being sacrificed. They let him walk into the ring again and again, until his legs couldn't hold him, until his bones snapped under pressure, and nobody stopped it. What happens when your greatest warrior becomes your nation's favorite victim? And why did the crowd cheer even as he crumbled? It all started with one fight that changed his destiny. Before the scars, before the limping walk, before the arena lights dimmed on his legacy, there was only one name echoing through the halls of Japanese combat sports: Kazushi Sakuraba. He wasn't supposed to be a fighter. He wasn't bred in the veiled Tudo gyms of Brazil or the wrestling halls of America. He was a professional wrestler, an entertainer, a man trained to sell a fight, not survive one. But when Pride FC came calling in the late 1990s, they didn't want another clone. They wanted someone different, someone who could carry the torch of Japanese pride and stare down the invincible myth of the Gracie family. And Sakuraba? He stepped into the fire with a smile. No one truly believed he could win. Not against the family that created Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, not against a lineage of undefeated fighters who claimed to be untouchable. But on May 1st, 2000, in front of a roaring Tokyo Dome crowd, Sakuraba did the unthinkable. He fought Royce Gracie for 90 minutes. No time limits, no corner stoppages, just pure will. And when Royce's team finally threw in the towel, it wasn't just a win, it was a revolution. The Gracie Killer was born, and Japan erupted in joy. Newspapers called it a national victory. Fans wept, fighters bowed to him, and the promoters? They saw dollar signs. Sakuraba had transcended sport. He had become a symbol of resistance, of rebellion, of pure warrior spirit. But something else was born that night too, a quiet, almost invisible sacrifice. Because for every legend built, there's a price extracted. And Sakuraba had just signed a silent contract with pain. He wouldn't walk away after that war. He would keep walking in, again and again, while his joints screamed and his muscles tore, while his brain rattled in his skull. The audience only saw the man with the orange tights and the playful grin. They didn't see the bruises that never healed, the concussions that blurred his memory, the weight of being more than a man, and the pain of never being allowed to be just that. The victories would keep coming, but they would leave something behind each time. And soon, so would Sakuraba. As Sakuraba's legend grew, so did the beast around him. Pride Fighting Championships wasn't like anything the world had ever seen. It was spectacle mixed with savagery, a billion-yen empire powered by blood and myth. And at the heart of it all, a wiry Japanese man with cauliflower ears and a battered smile. Sakuraba didn't care about weight classes. He didn't care about safety. He fought men who outweighed him by 40 pounds, 60 pounds, sometimes more. Why? Because Pride knew the audience loved watching him suffer. They adored watching him overcome. The promotion handed him giants: Igor Vovchanchin, Quinton Rampage Jackson, Kimo Leopoldo. And each time Sakuraba stepped forward like a kamikaze pilot, knowing full well he might not come back the same. And sometimes he didn't. The fans didn't just love him, they idolized him. In Japan, Sakuraba wasn't just a fighter. He was something holy. He was Bushido made flesh, a man who refused to quit even as his body betrayed him. That was the magic, and that was the tragedy. Pride never gave him a break. There was no rebuilding, no rehab, only war after war. He'd tape up his knees, inject painkillers into his joints, and limp into the ring because that's what the hero was supposed to do. And the more he suffered, the more they cheered. He never said no. Not once. Even when the damage started showing, even when his face puffed from trauma and his speech slurred, he was the golden goose, and no one protects the goose. They bleed it dry. By the early 2000s, Sakuraba's aura was dimming, not because of failure, because of erosion. He was winning less, but fighting more. And with each loss, the applause didn't soften. It got louder. Because the fans didn't want perfection. They wanted pain. They wanted to watch him fall and rise, and then fall again. But Pride had bigger plans for him. And those plans involved a man who would change Sakuraba's life forever in the most brutal way possible. There are beatings, and then there are rituals of destruction. Wanderlei Silva didn't just beat Kazushi Sakuraba, he dismantled him, piece by piece, soul by soul. Their first encounter in 2001 wasn't a fight, it was a massacre broadcast to millions. Silva was in his prime, a walking blade soaked in violence. His fists were granite, his knees were wrecking balls, and Sakuraba, he was already damaged goods. His knees were shot, his neck barely held together by muscle memory and willpower, but he stepped in anyway. Within minutes, Silva slammed a knee into Sakuraba's face that cracked his orbital bone. Then came the punches, the elbows. The referee had to pull Silva off like he was prying open the jaws of a beast. Sakuraba's arm hung lifeless at his side, his shoulder completely dislocated. The doctors told him not to fight. His corner begged him to retire, but just 8 months later, he came back. And not to fight someone new. He came back to fight Wanderlei Silva again. In the rematch, Sakuraba didn't stand a chance. Silva broke him again. More brutally, more coldly, and then pride. Booked a third. Let that sink in. Most fighters wouldn't fight a man like Wanderlei Silva once. Sakuraba fought him 3 times and lost 3 times. But the fans, they kept coming. The arenas sold out. His face, swollen, torn, and stitched, was still on every billboard. And Sakuraba kept saying yes. He didn't walk to the ring anymore. He limped. He didn't punch with power. He swung with memory. But still, the promoters smiled. The ticket sales were strong. The legend was bleeding, but the myth was immortal. Wanderlei said later that he respected Sakuraba more than anyone he ever fought, because Sakuraba never backed down. But maybe he should have, because what came next made even Silva's destruction look merciful. By the time Kazushi Sakuraba stepped into the ring with Ricardo Arona, his body was already a canvas of old wounds. But this time, the damage went beyond anything physical. It was psychological. It was the moment fans around the world began whispering the word nobody in Japan dared to say: abuse. Ricardo Arona wasn't known for his striking. He wasn't a brawler. He was a suffocating grappler, heavy, relentless, and strategic. But on that night, Arona didn't need to submit Sakuraba. He just needed to drag him through 3 rounds of helplessness. And that's exactly what he did. For 15 minutes, Sakuraba was tossed around like a rag doll, slammed, squeezed, flattened. He had no answer. He didn't throw punches. He didn't fight back. He just endured. The crowd watched in silence. His corner barely reacted. The commentators lowered their voices, and still, no one stopped it. Midway through round 2, something horrifying became clear. Sakuraba wasn't trying to win. He was just trying to survive. And even that was slipping away. His face swelled. His eyes barely opened. And yet, between rounds, he whispered to his team, "I'm okay." He wasn't. Doctors should have stepped in. Referees should have waved it off. But pride wasn't built on mercy. It was built on mythology. And myths are supposed to endure, even when they're being shattered in front of us. When the final bell rang, Arona had won every second of the fight, but no one was celebrating. Sakuraba slumped in his corner, broken and breathless. It wasn't just another loss. It was a warning shot, a moment when even the most loyal fans had to ask themselves, how much longer can this go on? But that question didn't stop the next booking, or the one after, because when a legend's body breaks down, there's always someone ready to make money off the ruins. And Sakuraba, he was still saying yes. Sakuraba was never afraid of pain, but now pain was his only constant. He wasn't recovering between fights. He was patching himself together like a broken machine, held in place with tape, cortisone, and pride. And the fight world just kept watching. In Japanese media, he was still the IQ wrestler, still the trickster who made Gracie quit. But in the locker room, behind closed doors, Sakuraba was falling apart. His joints barely moved. His bones were calcified from damage. His ears ballooned into grotesque shapes that exploded mid-fight. But somehow, promoters still found ways to book him. They pitted him against newer, younger fighters, bigger, stronger men. And Sakuraba, strapped with braces, eyes dulled from trauma, kept walking forward, one limp at a time. He began losing muscle mass. His reflexes were gone. In one fight, he was kneed in the face and didn't even flinch. Not because he was tough, but because he didn't see it coming. The reaction time just wasn't there. But the audience didn't know that. They still applauded. They still screamed his name. Because they weren't watching a man. They were watching nostalgia. Even as pride dissolved and new promotions emerged, Sakuraba remained the constant. Dream, K1, even special exhibitions. Every new banner wanted the legend, and the legend never said no. His own body tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. At one point, doctors told him he risked permanent paralysis if he kept fighting. His spine had deteriorated to a dangerous level. But Sakuraba smiled and taped up his wrists again. Because walking away would mean he was human, and Japan didn't want him to be human. They wanted him to be immortal, even if it killed him. And it almost did, more than once. But somehow, it got worse. When Kazushi Sakuraba signed with K1, there was a moment of hope. Maybe this would be different. Maybe it would be a softer farewell, a graceful exit for a man who had given so much. But that fantasy was shattered the moment the cage door closed and Melvin Manhoef stepped in. Manhoef wasn't a grappler. He was a wrecking ball, explosive, violent, and built to end fights quickly. And Sakuraba? He was slower than ever, stiffer, a shadow of his former self. The bell rang, and within seconds, Manhoef launched a right hand that thundered into Sakuraba's temple. He dropped like a puppet whose strings had been cut. It was fast, brutal, merciful in a way, but it was also horrifying. And K1? They booked him again and again. Sakuraba's cauliflower ears exploded mid-fight against Jason Miller. Blood poured down his neck. Commentators gasped. The audience went silent. And still, the fight continued. There were no stoppages. There was no compassion. He fought Shinya Aoki in what was supposed to be a friendly exhibition. Aoki mocked him, toyed with him, made faces as he struck Sakuraba with ease. It wasn't a contest. It was a spectacle, a sad reminder that even legends get humiliated when they're used past their expiration date. Sakuraba, always respectful, said little after these fights. No complaints, no anger, just that same battered grin. That same walk back to the locker room. Limping, nodding to fans, alone. But the truth was impossible to ignore. Sakuraba wasn't fighting anymore. He was being paraded, wheeled out like a war trophy, blood-stained and bent for one last round of applause. The pain wasn't poetic anymore. It was grotesque, and everyone could see it, except the ones who were still cashing in. The next time he stepped into the ring, people started praying he would make it out alive. After years of silence, one interview changed everything. Sakuraba sat down for a televised conversation in Tokyo, his hair now graying, his face slightly sunken, his body visibly worn. The interviewer smiled, but Sakuraba didn't return it. His eyes were heavy, not with sleep, but with memory. They asked him about the Wanderlei fights. He chuckled faintly and said, "He was a monster, but I kept going." Then, after a pause, he added something that sent chills through the studio. "I probably fought too long." It was the first time Sakuraba had ever admitted that. Not to fans, not to reporters, and probably not even to himself. There was no pride in his voice, just a quiet acceptance. The kind of reflection that only comes when the body has failed and the mind is finally allowed to speak. He touched his ear, now disfigured beyond repair. He flexed his fingers, knuckles swollen and stiff. "I can't really run anymore," he said. "I can walk, but not fast." Then he laughed again, trying to hide the sadness. But it didn't work. The laughter cracked, and so did his voice. Throughout the interview, he never blamed pride, never blamed the fans, never blamed anyone but himself. "They gave me the fights, and I said yes." Simple, honest, devastating. But the most haunting moment came when he was asked about legacy. The camera zoomed in, Sakuraba's mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked down, thinking. Finally, he said, "I hope people remember I tried my best, even when it wasn't smart." It wasn't just humility, it was an unspoken cry, because in those words was an admission that his career, the very thing people celebrated, was also the thing that ruined him. He went on to say that he didn't regret anything, but even then, his eyes told a different story. Not of regret, but of longing, for time, for rest, for peace. But fighters like Sakuraba don't get peace. Not in Japan. Not when they become something more than human, because the more they give, the more is expected, and the more it hurts to say goodbye. The interview ended. The screen faded to black, but the weight of those words, "I probably fought too long," echoed louder than any punch he ever threw. And yet, there were still some who refused to listen. Outside of Japan, the tone had shifted. Fighters, fans, and commentators around the globe weren't just concerned, they were horrified. Joe Rogan said plainly on his podcast, Sakuraba shouldn't have been fighting years ago. What they let happen to him is insane. Bas Rutten, a fellow legend of the sport, called it borderline criminal. To the West, this wasn't a case of a warrior going out on his shield. This was a man being fed to lions while everyone applauded. It was abuse under the bright lights, packaged as tradition. But in Japan, the narrative was different. Sakuraba was still a symbol, still the embodiment of Bushido. His face still sold merch. His name still headlined events. Documentaries were made highlighting his glory, not his decline. He was called the last samurai, revered but never saved. Even Japanese media refused to acknowledge the cost. They praised his heart, his loyalty, his refusal to quit, but they never asked why no one told him to stop, why no one pulled him aside and said, enough. In private, some fighters began to speak out, quietly, anonymously. They said Sakuraba was a cautionary tale, that young fighters were told, be like him, but none of them wanted to be. They respected him, but they feared becoming him, because being Sakuraba meant sacrificing everything, your body, your future, even your dignity. And for what? For fans who stopped watching once the blood dried? For promoters who moved on to the next fresh face? The international MMA community tried to intervene. They wrote articles, created video essays. Some even sent letters to Japanese organizations. But nothing changed, because change would mean admitting guilt, admitting they had turned a man into a relic, a living corpse. And so the fights continued. The arenas filled. Sakuraba kept walking forward. While the world screamed, "Stop!" Japan whispered, "One more!" And no one was listening to the man in the middle, broken, tired, and still trying to smile through the pain. Because in Japan, you don't retire a legend, you bury them. Today, when Kazushi Sakuraba walks into a room, you can still hear the applause. You can still feel the respect, but if you watch closely, you'll see the limp, the way he favors one side, the way his knees don't quite bend, the way he lowers himself into chairs like each movement costs a piece of his soul. His hands tremble when he signs autographs. His voice cracks when he talks about the old days, and when he smiles, it feels like it's carrying weight. He's still around. He still trains occasionally, appears at events, shakes hands, takes photos. But he doesn't fight anymore. Not in the cage, at least. The real battle now is inside his body. A war against time, pain, and the years he gave away. He never got a proper send-off. No grand retirement tour. No teary speech in front of a packed arena. Because no one wanted the myth to end. And that's the most painful part. He never got to say goodbye on his terms. Because the terms were never his to begin with. There's no statue, no national pension, just worn-out joints, scattered memories, and a culture that quietly moved on. The fans who once wept for him now cheer for the next warrior willing to bleed. The promoters who once called him irreplaceable now book fresh faces with clean slates. And Sakuraba, he exists in the in-between, not fully gone, not fully present. A man who was once everything, and now is just a reminder of what happens when no one says stop. Some say he's lucky that he lived his dream, that he became immortal. But immortality has a cost, and Sakuraba paid it in full. His legacy isn't just wins and highlights, it's caution, it's pain, it's the echo of a man who gave more than anyone ever should and received less than he deserved. He was a warrior, a martyr, a mirror reflecting the darkest parts of the fight game. And now, all that remains is the broken body he left behind. Sometimes, Sakuraba shows up ringside, watching fights from the shadows of the arenas he once owned. Young fighters bow to him, fans shout his name, but behind his quiet nod is a man who knows exactly what it cost to become that legend. He doesn't correct their praise, he just listens. Because what else can he do? He has said in passing that he dreams less about victory now, and more about silence, about fishing, about mornings without pain. But the damage is permanent. Every morning, his body reminds him of the price The limps, the surgeries, the tremors, they're all that's left after the crowd goes home. And the worst part? No one will ever endure what he did again. Not because the system changed, but because he already paid for it. Kazushi Sakuraba didn't just fight opponents. He fought time, culture, memory, and in the end, he lost to all of them. Not in shame, but in silence. And maybe that's the tragedy.